Every year, hundreds of pregnant women in the United States report incidents of police violence. But the numbers tell an even darker story. Pregnant black women are 3 times more likely to experience physical force during police interactions compared to their white counterparts. Today, I'm diving into a heated discussion about justice and revenge after a shocking incident involving a pregnant woman and a cop. Can I navigate these tough topics and find a way to bring light to the situation? Before we begin today's story, please let us know where you are viewing from. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video. Aaliyah Daniels always believed that kindness could change the world. At 29 years old, 7 months pregnant with her first child, she spent her days preparing the nursery in their small but cozy apartment in Stonebridge Heights. Her husband, Marcus Daniels, was the steady force behind her dreams, a quiet man who carried the weight of the world in his eyes but spoke softly, only when words were necessary. They were a young black couple standing on the edge of new life, bursting with hope. Neither of them could have imagined that one afternoon, a simple stop for orange juice would spiral into a nightmare. A confrontation with a man in blue uniform, a man who was supposed to protect, but instead brought terror. In a matter of seconds, their lives would fracture. And what Marcus would do next would send shockwaves far beyond their small town. The sun was a heavy gold that afternoon, sinking low into the sprawling streets of Stonebridge Heights. The summer heat shimmered off the pavement as Marcus pulled their aging sedan into a corner convenience store. It was supposed to be quick. In and out. Aaliyah smiled at him before stepping out of the car. She wore a flowing sundress that swayed with her steps, and her hands instinctively cradled her growing belly. 7 months. Their daughter, they decided to name her Naomi, would be here before the fall leaves turned. Marcus stayed in the car, scrolling idly through his phone. He had promised Aaliyah he'd help pick out paint colors for the nursery after they got back. He never saw the cruiser pull in. Not until it was too late. Officer Reynolds was known in Stonebridge Heights. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a crew cut that matched the coldness in his eyes. His reputation wasn't one of kindness. It was one of control, fear, and silent warnings that echoed in black households like unwritten rules. Don't make sudden moves. Keep your hands visible. Always comply. But that afternoon, Officer Reynolds wasn't looking for rules. He was looking for someone to blame. Aaliyah was halfway to the store's entrance when she heard the sharp bark of a voice behind her. "Hey! You stop right there!" She turned slowly, confusion knitting her brows. Marcus, from inside the car, straightened up, heart beginning to hammer in his chest. Officer Reynolds approached fast, hand on his belt, posture aggressive. "I said stop," he repeated, louder. Aaliyah stopped, palms out to her sides instinctively. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "You fit the description of a suspect," Reynolds said. "Suspect? I just came to." "Don't talk back." The escalation was instant. Reynolds was close now, towering over her. Marcus flung open the car door, shouting, "She's pregnant. What are you doing?" But his voice barely cut through the thickness of the air. Aaliyah, flustered, tried to move back toward the car. She moved too slow. Reynolds shoved her shoulder. She stumbled, her feet, heavy and swollen, struggling to balance. And then, without warning, he lifted his boot and kicked her squarely in the abdomen. The sound, a dull, sickening thud, tore through Marcus's brain like a gunshot. "No!" Marcus screamed, sprinting toward them. Aaliyah crumpled to the ground, gasping, hands clutching her belly. Reynolds spun toward Marcus, drew his weapon, and screamed, "Get down! Get down now!" Instinct screamed at Marcus to run to his wife, but logic, the grim, brutal logic of survival, pinned him in place. He dropped to his knees, hands behind his head, tears flooding his vision. All he could hear was Aaliyah's strangled cries and the blaring siren of his own heart breaking. Within minutes, more units arrived. Aaliyah was barely conscious as paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. Marcus, cuffed and shoved into the back of a cruiser, watched helplessly as the ambulance doors slammed shut. No one looked at him. Not as a man. Not as a husband. Not as a human being. He was just another black body contained in steel and leather and violence. In the back seat of the squad car, Marcus pressed his forehead to the window, whispering a prayer that Naomi would survive. That Aaliyah would survive. "Please, please God, don't let this be the end." Marcus spent the night in a cold holding cell, the concrete biting into his skin. His hands, still sore from the tightness of the cuffs, shook with fury and fear. No one told him anything. Not about Aaliyah. Not about Naomi. Not about whether he would ever see them again. At 3 a.m., the cell door clanged open. A lawyer, young, nervous, slipped inside. "Your wife's alive," he said quickly. "The baby's stable for now. She's asking for you." Marcus crumpled inward, grief and relief warring inside his chest. But there was no reunion yet. They processed him out like another piece of paperwork, fingerprinted, photographed, charged with obstruction. It wasn't until dawn bled across the sky that Marcus stumbled out into the parking lot, numb, his shirt stained from sleeping on the floor. He had only one destination. The hospital reeked of antiseptic and grief. Marcus raced to the maternity ward, ignoring the stares, ignoring the fear gnawing his insides. When he entered Aaliyah's room, his heart nearly shattered again. She was hooked up to monitors. Her face, usually so vibrant, was pale and bruised. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Without a word, Marcus dropped to his knees beside her bed and buried his face against her hand. They stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing. Just breathing. Just surviving. When she finally spoke, her voice was a hoarse whisper. "They kicked our baby." Marcus could only nod, his throat too tight to answer. 2 days later, the footage leaked. A teenager across the street had recorded everything on his phone. The video showed Aaliyah's slow, careful steps. The shove. The brutal kick. Marcus's anguished cry. By noon, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, hashtags exploded. Justice for Aaliyah. Protect black mothers. Stop police violence. The mayor issued a sterile statement about an ongoing investigation. The police chief promised full transparency. But Officer Reynolds? He was placed on paid administrative leave. Marcus watched the news in Aaliyah's hospital room, his hands balled into fists. Paid leave. For nearly killing his wife and unborn child. Justice was a joke. And he was tired of laughing through the pain. Marcus didn't want revenge. He wanted healing. He wanted safety. He wanted dignity. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that the system wasn't going to give him any of that. Their lawyer filed a civil suit. Activists organized marches. Journalists called day and night. But inside Marcus burned something deeper. This wasn't just about Aaliyah anymore. It wasn't just about Naomi. It was about every mother who had been treated like a suspect instead of a human being. Every child whose life had been stomped before it even began. Every husband who had knelt on concrete, praying that love could outshout hate. Marcus knew what he had to do. Not with fists. Not with guns. But with something far more dangerous. The truth. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank notebook. Aaliyah rested in the bedroom down the hall, exhausted after another night of nightmares. The house was too quiet. For days, Marcus had replayed the scene in his mind. The shove. The kick. The way he froze, hands up, helpless. No more. He refused to let fear chain him again. Marcus scribbled 3 words on the page. March for Mothers. It had to be peaceful. It had to be undeniable. It had to be led by those who were most vulnerable, the ones who had the most to lose. He picked up his phone and began calling everyone he knew. Word spread fast. At first, it was just friends and family, old neighbors, Aaliyah's co-workers from the community center, members of their church. But then, something unexpected happened. Other women came. Women who had lost pregnancies after being tackled during traffic stops. Women who had been thrown to the ground during raids. Women whose scars didn't show on the outside, but cut deep on the inside. They carried stories too painful to speak aloud, but they showed up. With strollers. With signs. With hands ready to hold each other steady. By the end of the week, Marcus stood before a crowded community hall, packed shoulder to shoulder. We don't want chaos, Marcus told them. We want to show them who we are. Mothers. Fathers. Sons. Daughters. Human beings. Applause echoed off the walls. Hope, for the first time in weeks, flickered to life. The morning after the meeting, Marcus found a note shoved into their mailbox. No name. No signature. It read simply, "Stay quiet. Or else." Marcus crushed it in his hand, his jaw tightening. The message was clear. Someone didn't want them to march. He didn't tell Aaliyah. She was healing, physically, emotionally. He couldn't burden her with more fear. But that night, he slept with a baseball bat tucked beneath the bed. Tension frayed their home like invisible wires. Aaliyah grew distant, her smiles forced, her laughter hollow. "Maybe we should let it go," she whispered one night, voice trembling. "Maybe it's too dangerous." Marcus pulled her into his arms. He could feel her heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. "If we don't stand now," he said, voice low, "they'll keep doing it. To us. To our kids. To everyone who looks like us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Because she knew he was right. Because she was terrified of losing him, too. The cost of resistance wasn't just bruises or court dates. It was the quiet fear that love might not survive the fire. But Marcus made her a promise that night. "I'll come home to you. I swear it." 24 hours before the march, Marcus stood before City Hall, holding a press conference. He wore a simple white shirt. Behind him stood hundreds of women, some cradling their children, others holding photos of babies lost to violence. "Tomorrow," Marcus said into the sea of cameras, "we walk for every mother who has been silenced. For every child who never had a chance. We are not your enemy. We are your neighbors. Your friends. Your family." The city officials didn't respond with words. Instead, that night, police presence doubled across Stonebridge Heights. Barricades were set up. Helicopters circled like vultures. The message was clear. They were ready for a fight. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes. Every possible outcome played in his mind. What if they tear-gassed the crowd? What if they arrested him? What if Aaliyah woke up alone, clutching Naomi with no one beside her? He closed his eyes and prayed. Not for safety, but for strength. The kind of strength that didn't break when the world tried to crush you. He slid back into bed, curling gently around Aaliyah's sleeping form. For a few stolen hours, he allowed himself to believe they would be okay. The morning of the march dawned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low like the city itself was holding its breath. Marcus laced his boots slowly, methodically, as if preparing for battle. Not a battle of fists. A battle of hearts. When he stepped outside, the streets were already full. Hundreds, no thousands, of people. White, black, brown, young, old. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. Many wore white shirts. Many carried roses, a symbol of life, of peace. At the front of the crowd stood Aaliyah, arm in arm with a line of pregnant women. Their bellies curved proudly beneath their clothes, visible, vulnerable, undeniable. A chant rippled through the crowd. Protect black mothers. Protect black mothers. Marcus took Aaliyah's hand. Together, they stepped forward. They hadn't even gone 2 blocks before they saw the barricade. Rows of officers, armored and grim, blocking the path. At their center, Officer Reynolds. Smirking. Unapologetic. For a moment, the two sides simply stared at each other. The world held its breath. Marcus squeezed Aaliyah's hand. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully. No sudden moves. No threats. Just truth. He pulled a small folded photo from his pocket, the latest sonogram of Naomi, and held it high for the officers to see. "You kicked her," Marcus said, his voice steady, carrying over the silence. "But you didn't break her. You didn't break us." The crowd behind him roared in approval. Reynolds shifted, discomfort flickering across his face for the first time. The police couldn't move without optics turning ugly. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. After a long, tense beat, the officers parted, opening a narrow path. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He simply nodded once, to Aaliyah, to Naomi, to every unseen mother who had marched silently before them, and led the crowd through. The march made headlines across the country. Thousands march for mothers in Stonebridge Heights. Pregnant woman's attack by officer sparks national outrage. Justice for Aaliyah movement gains momentum. Marcus watched the coverage with a surreal detachment, as if it was happening to someone else. Aaliyah curled up next to him on the couch, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Naomi kicked gently beneath her fingers, a soft reminder that life was still moving forward. "We did it," Aaliyah whispered. Marcus kissed her forehead, but deep down he knew. This was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, under mounting public pressure, the city finally acted. Officer Reynolds was indicted on charges of assault and misconduct. The announcement sparked a fresh wave of protests, some celebratory, some demanding harsher charges. Marcus sat in the front pew of the courtroom when the charges were read aloud. Reynolds stood stiffly in his uniform, face like stone. No apology. No remorse. Only cold calculation. Their eyes met across the room. For the first time, Marcus saw fear flicker behind Reynolds' rigid facade. It didn't bring him joy. It brought something heavier, sorrow. How many men like Reynolds were out there? How many thought their badge gave them the right to destroy lives without consequence? As the weeks dragged on, Marcus became a reluctant symbol. He was invited to speak at rallies. Cable news networks wanted interviews. Celebrities tweeted his name. Everywhere he went, people thanked him, praised him. But inside, Marcus felt hollow. He hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't asked to be a leader. He just wanted his family whole. Late one night, he sat alone on the porch, the cool air heavy with the scent of rain. Aaliyah joined him, her bare feet patting softly on the wood. "You're doing good," she said simply, sitting beside him. "But don't lose yourself." Marcus nodded, but part of him already knew. The fight had changed him. There was no going back to the man he used to be. The defense strategy was simple: smear and deflect. In court filings, Reynolds' attorneys painted Marcus as aggressive, threatening, hostile. They questioned Aaliyah's actions. They even suggested Naomi's health issues were unrelated to the attack. Every word felt like another kick to the gut. Another reminder that even when the truth was on their side, they were still fighting uphill. "They're trying to make us the villains," Aaliyah said bitterly after one brutal day in court. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tear down the whole broken system. But instead, he reminded himself of the lesson he had learned on that brutal afternoon. Strength wasn't in violence. Strength was in survival. The courtroom was packed the day the trial began. Media lined the hallways. Protesters gathered outside with signs and chants. Armed officers stood stiff at every doorway. Marcus took the stand first. He told the truth. Every painful, humiliating, soul-crushing detail. He spoke about how helpless he felt, watching Aaliyah fall. He spoke about the terror of not knowing if Naomi would live. He spoke about the anger, the sorrow, the tiny ember of hope that refused to die. Across the room, Reynolds sat stone-faced, refusing to meet his eyes. When Marcus finished, there was a moment of silence so deep it seemed the whole world was holding its breath. The truth was out now. Raw. Unfiltered. Undeniable. During a break in the trial, Marcus found himself alone in the courthouse hallway. Reynolds appeared at the other end, escorted by guards, but for a moment, they were just two men, unfiltered by courtroom decorum. Reynolds hesitated, then stepped closer. His mouth opened, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might apologize. But all Reynolds said was, "You ruined my life." Marcus blinked. 1,000 things he could have said swirled inside him. Rage. Condemnation. Accusation. Instead, he said something that even surprised himself. "You did that yourself." He turned and walked away, heart pounding. Not with anger, but with a clean, fierce certainty that he was no longer the victim here. He was the survivor. The jury deliberated for 2 tense days. Marcus and Aaliyah barely slept, barely ate. Every ring of the phone sent their hearts racing. Finally, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. In the packed courtroom, the forewoman stood, voice steady. "On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty." Gasps rippled through the room. Reynolds' face crumpled, the first real emotion he had shown in months. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase the pain. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was consequence. It was the beginning of healing. After the verdict, life didn't magically return to normal. Aaliyah still woke up some nights, gasping from nightmares. Marcus still froze sometimes when he heard sirens. But Naomi was born healthy, screaming and kicking, a fierce little fighter from her first breath. They named her Naomi Faith, because faith had carried them through the fire. They spent long afternoons in the sun, watching Naomi sleep on Aaliyah's chest, breathing in the simple, sacred rhythm of survival. Some wounds, Marcus realized, would never fully heal. But healing wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't happened. It was about choosing to love anyway. To hope anyway. To fight for joy anyway. 1 year later, Marcus stood before a crowd again. Not at a protest. At the grand opening of the Naomi Faith Center for Maternal Justice. A place where mothers who had been brutalized, marginalized, and ignored could find resources, legal aid, and most importantly, community. We are not statistics, Marcus said to the gathered crowd. We are not targets. We are not invisible. We are powerful. And we will be seen. Aaliyah, holding Naomi on her hip, beamed at him from the front row. The applause rolled over him like a tide. Not fame. Not revenge. Not even justice. Legacy. Something no boot could ever stomp out. It arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A simple, battered envelope addressed to Marcus. No return address. No markings. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper. I'm sorry. I was scared. I was wrong. Signed simply, Reynolds. Marcus stared at the letter for a long time, the paper growing damp between his fingers. It wasn't enough. It didn't erase the scars. It didn't bring back the nights stolen by fear. And yet, it was something. A crack in the armor. A glimpse of the human being beneath the badge. Marcus didn't know what to feel. He only knew one thing for certain. The anger was still there. Waiting. Whispering. The next day, Marcus found himself driving through Stonebridge Heights without really thinking. Past the intersection where Aaliyah had been kicked. Past the cracked sidewalks and crumbling houses. Past the ghosts of everything they had survived. He pulled over by the old corner store and just sat there, engine idling. In the passenger seat, Naomi babbled softly, clutching her stuffed bear. Marcus closed his eyes. He remembered standing there that day, hands up, begging. He remembered the sound of Aaliyah hitting the ground. He remembered the way the world tilted on its axis, forever changed. The rage was a living thing inside him. Coiled. Hungry. He could still find Reynolds. Could still make him pay in ways the courts never could. The thought was a cold comfort. And a dangerous temptation. It was pure chance. Or fate. Marcus was picking up groceries when he saw him. Reynolds. No uniform. No armor. Just a broken man, thin and hollow-eyed, standing by the checkout counter. Their eyes locked. For one frozen heartbeat, neither moved. And then slowly, Reynolds turned away, head bowed. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. Every muscle in his body screamed for action. For revenge. For justice. He could do it. Right here. Right now. One punch. One explosion of everything he had bottled up inside. No jury. No cameras. Just raw, undeniable reckoning. Marcus took a step forward. Then another. The world narrowed to a tunnel, heart pounding like a war drum. He stopped just behind Reynolds, so close he could hear him breathing. You know who I am, Marcus said quietly. Reynolds nodded, trembling slightly. For a long, terrible moment, Marcus simply stood there, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. He could end it. Right here. Right now. But then, a small hand tugged at his pant leg. Naomi. Looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Daddy. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in his soul all the same. He knelt down, scooping her into his arms, feeling her warmth against his chest. When he stood, Reynolds was still there, still silent, still waiting. Marcus leaned close, voice low and fierce. You're not worth her seeing that side of me. And he walked away. Not because Reynolds deserved mercy, but because Marcus deserved peace. That night, Marcus stood in the backyard, under the stars, Naomi asleep against his chest. Tears slipped down his face, silent and unbidden. Tears for the man he almost became. Tears for the man he refused to be. Aaliyah found him there, wrapped her arms around his waist without a word. Together, they stood in the dark, breathing in the cool night air, hearts beating in time. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy. It was painful. But it was possible. Every day was a choice. And tonight, Marcus chose love. 6 months later, Stonebridge Heights was changing. Not fast. Not perfectly. But changing. The Naomi Faith Center bustled with life. Mothers laughing, children playing, legal advocates offering hope where there had once been only fear. Marcus sat on the front steps one afternoon, watching the world go by. Aaliyah joined him, Naomi toddling between them with the careful determination of the newly walking. "She's strong," Aaliyah said, pride and wonder in her voice. "Just like her mother," Marcus replied, smiling. They sat there in companionable silence, watching as Naomi picked up a fallen rose from the garden and toddled back to them, clutching it triumphantly. Life. Hope. A future they had fought tooth and nail to protect. Marcus realized in that moment that revenge had nothing on legacy. Legacy lived longer. Burned brighter. Healed deeper. Years later, when Naomi was old enough to ask, Marcus would tell her the story. Not the story of violence. Not the story of fear. The story of love. Of strength. Of standing tall when the world tried to break you. "Daddy, were you scared?" Naomi would ask, wide-eyed. "Terrified," Marcus would say, pulling her close. But being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up anyway. And when she asked him about Officer Reynolds, what he had done, and what Marcus had almost done, he would tell her the truth. "I almost let anger win," he would say. "But I chose you instead." Because in the end, the truest revenge wasn't hate. It was living. Thriving. Building a future their enemies could never touch. Time moved quietly after the storm. Stonebridge Heights wasn't fixed overnight. The cracked sidewalks were still there. The corner stores still struggled. The sirens still howled some nights. But so did laughter. So did hope. Naomi grew, steady and strong. She took her first steps on the same porch Marcus had stood on, fists clenched, years ago. She spoke her first words in the halls of the Naomi Faith Center. Her favorite word was up. Every time she stumbled, up. Every time she cried, up. Every time the world knocked her down, up. It was in her bones. In her blood. In the way she faced the world without fear. Marcus and Aaliyah watched with awe. Their daughter was becoming everything they had fought for. A living, breathing act of rebellion against despair. On Naomi's 10th birthday, Marcus sat her down under the big oak tree at the park. He held an old photo album in his lap, full of newspaper clippings, protest signs, and faded photographs. "I want to tell you a story," he said. Naomi leaned in, curious. He told her everything. The good. The bad. The days when it felt like the world was against them. The nights when they didn't know if they would survive. He told her about courage, the quiet kind, the kind you show when no one is watching. He told her about anger, and how easy it is to let it consume you. He told her about forgiveness, not for those who hurt you, but for yourself, so you could live free. When he finished, Naomi's eyes were shining. "I want to make things better too," she said fiercely. Marcus smiled, heart full. "You already are." 15 years after the attack, Stonebridge Heights had changed. The Naomi Faith Center had expanded into 3 neighboring cities. The streets were cleaner. The schools better funded. The police department had been gutted and rebuilt with real community oversight. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But the people had found their voices. And they refused to be silenced again. Marcus and Aaliyah sat on the same front porch where their journey had begun, Naomi now a senior in college, studying law and social justice. "You think we did enough?" Marcus asked quietly, watching the sun dip low. Aaliyah laced her fingers through his. "We did what we could," she said. "And we taught her how to do more." One crisp autumn day, Marcus ran into someone he never expected to see again. Officer Reynolds. No, not officer anymore. Just a man. Older. Grayer. Eyes hollowed out by years and regrets. They crossed paths at a community meeting about criminal justice reform. Marcus felt the old anger flare, a ghost rising from its grave. Reynolds nodded at him, slow and heavy. Not asking for forgiveness. Not offering excuses. Just acknowledgement. Marcus inclined his head once. Not as a friend. Not as an enemy. As two men who had survived their choices. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Sometimes the loudest victories were the ones you didn't shout about. That evening, Naomi took the stage at the new Stonebridge Heights Community Center. She stood tall, voice strong, eyes blazing. My parents taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about change, she said, the crowd silent and leaning forward. They showed me that love can outlast hate. That healing can outshine violence. That our past may shape us, but it does not define us. Marcus watched her, chest aching with pride and something deeper, a bittersweet kind of joy. This was it. This was the legacy. Not anger. Not fear. Hope. Hope dressed in sneakers and a denim jacket, holding a microphone like a torch. Hope refusing to back down. Later that night, Marcus walked alone through Stonebridge Heights. Past the street where it had all happened. Past the old grocery store. Past the graffiti that had once screamed for justice and now bloomed with murals of love, resilience, and strength. He stopped at the intersection where Aaliyah had fallen. Closed his eyes. Let himself remember. The fear. The rage. The helplessness. And then, he let it go. Not because it didn't matter. But because it mattered so much, he refused to let it chain him anymore. We're still standing, he whispered into the night. We're still standing. Chapter 38, The Final Choice. As he headed home, Marcus thought about Reynolds. About the life they had both led since that terrible day. He realized something profound. Revenge is a moment. Legacy is a lifetime. And Marcus chose legacy. Every damn day. He chose Naomi. He chose Aaliyah. He chose the laughter on the playgrounds, the paintings on the walls, the protests that ended with handshakes instead of handcuffs. He chose to believe that light, once lit, could never be extinguished. No matter how fierce the darkness. Back at home, Naomi was waiting for him on the porch, legs dangling over the side. Hey old man, she teased, smiling wide. Marcus ruffled her hair. Don't old man me. I could still outrun you. Naomi laughed, that full-bodied fearless laugh that had always been his favorite sound. They sat together, watching the stars blink into life overhead. You know, Naomi said, leaning her head on his shoulder, I think Stonebridge is lucky to have you. Marcus smiled softly. No, he said. I'm lucky to have Stonebridge. It made me who I needed to be. The story didn't end with courtrooms or protests. It didn't end with broken bones or bruised spirits. It ended, and began again, with a little girl picking up a fallen rose. With a man choosing love over hate, again and again. It ended with hope. Not the easy kind. Not the cheap kind. The kind you fight for. The kind you bleed for. The kind you build, one brick, one voice, one trembling, stubborn act of faith at a time.